Welcome to UberCube, the podcast where we discuss all things cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka UberBear, and I'm joined this afternoon on this rainy, stormy day here in North Carolina. Who is joining me? Who is with me? Who's got their galoshes?
I'm with you.
You, the audience, you are joining us.
Nice.
Just kidding. It's May. Hi.
And Stu, how y'all doing today?
Hi. So yeah, like we said, we're at the eye of a pretty light storm. Nice rainy day here. Just a great day to hang out a little bit earlier than normal.
It's a tropical storm here in not so sunny North Carolina today. But like you say, it's a good time to get up early and get some recording going in the afternoon.
Got some magic sorting today. I was getting all of my cubes prepped and locked and alphabetized and wooberged. And
What for, Anthony? Is there something happening soon?
Oh my goodness, yeah. So I got that was 3.5 hours of my life I'll never get back, and
It'll be so worth it to watch everyone else have all the fun with your cubes, though.
It would certainly be. So the topic today is kind of based on a situation, as we'll refer to it, in a recent draft we did here on the, what do we call it, Stu's back porch? We hang out? What you used to call it? It was...
I used to call it the BDSM, which was back deck Saturday or Sunday magic. And I obviously chose that name on purpose so that when I was inviting people, and I had this at my office, I was inviting people like, hey, do you want to come to my BDSM this weekend? And they were like, excuse me? I was like, yeah, it's back deck Sunday magic. And they were like, oh, now it makes sense. So,
Darn. Foiled again.
That's right.
Yeah.
Sorry. If you're expecting, anyway.
There will be charcuterie.
Yeah, anyway.
There will be. Yes, it's much more family friendly. So, but anyway, yeah. So we had a bit of, I don't even want to say it was just one. I feel like recently there's actually been a few occasions where the subject of this episode really came to light. And actually, I could even expand a little bit further out, which I might do, time permitting. So anyway, let's start out. May, I'm coming to you first. What are you drinking this afternoon?
I am drinking another Wilson's Orchard and Farms, but this time it's Honey Crisp Hard Cider.
Ooh, like
Nice.
that. Very nice.
Stu, what are you having today, bud?
I'm having a New Belgium Voodoo Ranger IPA. What about yourself?
Me too, twinsies. Let's go.
Twinsies indeed.
Wow.
All right.
So today's episode is going to be based on a sprinkle of power outliers. What is the appropriate amount of power outliers that you could possibly have in your cube environment? And this correlates directly to something May and I were pre-gaming about, power bands within cube environments. May, do you have anything to add to that before we stroll down this conversation any deeper?
Yeah, mostly it comes with the preface when we're talking about this topic is that it comes with what the context of your environment and what you're trying to curate. Some people like small power bands, some people like very wide power bands, but usually outliers have certain rules, and that's what we're hoping to kind of talk about today.
Yeah, so there'd be cards that are on the cusp of being almost too strong. The meme where the chef is doing the pinch of salt, tossing it. That's kind of what we're talking about. We're not talking about these ones that are so egregious, but the ones that definitely stand out in the draft, the ones that maybe cause some conversations that come up like, I don't know if this is right for the environment, but then the curator's ready to volley that conversation and say, oh, there's a reason why it's here.
Well, let's talk about the first one that's on the list, right? Because this is a conversation that you've had with at least one curator in our group, and it's just not a card that you can throw in any cube.
You're referring to Soul Ring?
I am referring to Soul Ring.
Yeah.
And actually, the reason why I think this has maybe been normalized so much over the last few years is because of the fact that it is basically included, well, it is included in all of the Commander precons. So it's just almost become synonymous with people playing Magic, right? It's a great card to get in. It's rarely a bad card to have in your hand, right? Maybe if you're looking for a bomb and you're top decking later on, but it's a very, very powerful card. Certainly a pick one, pack one in a vintage cube environment. But I think, like I said, because it's become just so normalized as being there because of Commander, that's definitely a card that, like, as you've mentioned on previous occasions, you can't just throw it in any cube.
Yeah, we kind of did an episode on this topic where we featured that card. It was Too Powerful Magic. And if you wouldn't mind referencing that episode, it'll really explain where we're coming from as a baseline here. The particular cards that we're going to talk about today are going to cusp on that idea, but they're not like the roadside flares you're going to see during a major car wreck. We're talking about more of like a speed bump telling you to slow down.
No, I think it's when the freeway goes straight and then the speed limit goes up, so that way you're like, oh, now I can turn up the speed a bit.
Yeah, they're noticeable, but they're not screaming like this does not belong. You know, which one of us is different,
Right.
which one of us is not the same. And there's a healthy dose of those you can have. May and I have talked about this extensively, where you can pepper a few in there, right? And they keep your baseline of your cube from not feeling so flat to your drafters, because to quote May on numerous occasions, that aha moment oftentimes springs from these cards. They're just peppered and sprinkled across your different environment that are noticeable. May, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I will also add that when it comes to a lot of these aha moments, sometimes having power outliers to give those aha moments is a perfectly great reason, even if we aren't extensively talking about just developing the aha moments.
So, as we talked about recently with the whole back porch incident, right?
Yeah.
But also, we're going to include in this conversation some cards that I have just injected in my environments for my new CubeCon lockdown with zero testing. So this is kind of a multi-tier episode.
You are a brave man.
I know, I did it last year too. What did we talk about? Kappa
Kappa
Cannoneer.
Cannoneer.
I learned nothing ever. I'm Jon Snow. I'm just wandering around in the wilderness.
Just throwing cards into cubes all willy-nilly.
And we're going to talk about some of those. And what's interesting is whenever you add these unique cards that may be power outliers because you want to be the quote-unquote belle of the ball, right? I want to show everybody my curating prowess, so I introduced this brand new cool card. Everybody's going to love it. You do risk that unlocking, or not so much of a risk, but maybe you gained unlocking a synergy or combo that you were unaware of because you didn't test it and you didn't validate it before in your environment, and that's okay. That's where the play testing comes in. You have any thoughts on that, Stu?
Yeah, I think it's essential to test. And I think, like I say, just showing up at CubeCon and having 400 people there test it is going to be some great information, but let's hope the balance is there.
Willy-nilly. You know, the flappy arms thing whenever you're going down the road,
Yeah.
you see it says, pull over here, sail, sail, sail. Yeah, that's how I try magic cards. May, do you have any thoughts on that before we start breaking these cards down?
Nope, we're good. Let's get
All
into
right.
it.
So, Stu, would you like to take on this first? We're going to call it the incident, the back porch incident.
So this was a incident that happened fairly recently. We were sitting down back deck and we had busted out our good friend Nathan's almost legendary cube, and his cube is themed as a legendary cube, right? Lots of legendary creatures, legendary matters kind of theme. And it is a very, very fun cube to play. Lots of interesting interactions, lots of cool cards. And I built what I believed, actually what ended up being a very, very strong deck, very fun deck to play. And as I'm playing, I think it was my second or third game, and I'd won all the games up until that point. But as is not uncommon in our group, I hear a lot of complaining from a certain person down at the end of the table, which is invariably, it's usually Anthony complaining about something. But he was especially loud about these complaints tonight. And I was thinking, I wonder what's going on. It's probably just Anthony complaining. And he was playing our good friend Jason, which I ended up playing next.
And so,
how did your game go, Anthony?
well, so I built an amazing Dimir control deck.
Okay.
It was stellar. I'm not to be humble in that conversation, but it was banging. This was an amazing build. And Jason, he loves his Selesnya. And so that's kind of what we're pitting against. He is on his back foot until
As he was in a couple of, in at least one of ours.
until we introduce this card that kind of brings the topic to life as the first feature card. It's Umezawa's Jitte. For 2 colorless, you get a legendary artifact equipment. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage, put 2 charge counters on Umezawa's Jitte. Remove a charge counter from Umezawa's Jitte. Remove 1. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 until the end of the turn. Or target creature gets -1/-1 until the end of the turn. Or you gain 2 life, equipped for 2.
Doesn't really need much of an introduction, although we do like to, talk about all the cards. But this is one that as soon as it came down, I was like, hang on, Jitte? Really?
Oh, I was down at the
GT.
end. I was down at the end of the table, losing my mind, and everybody's kind of like, "What is he complaining about? What is he complaining about?" I'm like, "Oh my god, my deck is amazing, and I'm getting dismantled by Savannah lions that are wearing Jitte, turning sideways because Jason has captured the full power of the Death Star now, and who's even saying, I don't care if you block, I don't care if you don't block."
No.
I'm still getting my Jitte counters.
It doesn't matter.
Oh my god. And I would kill the creature, and guess what would happen? It would go on the next suicide thing that would run at me sideways and was screaming. And I was like, here comes another variant of a Savannah Lions turning sideways.
And that was
with Jitte.
And that was the problem that I was having.
Cut me to pieces.
Is that same kind of deal. And I had an aggro deck. I was building also a Selesnya deck. And the sort of themes that we were going for were different enough that we weren't really cannibalizing each other's strategies, except he has Jitte, right? So anytime you've got a creature deck versus a creature deck, that is just a way for even a lesser creature deck to just say, well, it doesn't really matter because I'm making my creatures bigger, I'm making your creatures smaller, I'm gaining myself life. And it took and I don't want to say that mine was a much better deck, although we played we played 3 games. We played the first game. I was in a very commanding position. Jitte came out, game over. Second game, he didn't get a Jitte. I stomped all over him. Third game, I was ahead fairly heavily. Jitte came down, end of game. And I will say this, it's a legendary cube. I don't know, I would have to go through the list and look for all of the removal spells.
Yeah.
I don't remember how many there were in there. I know I did have a way to remove it at one point in our third game, but I'd used it already thinking, okay, I'm in a great position. I'm just trying to squeeze through these last few points of damage. And then that darn Jitte came down, and that was the end of it.
So we'll let's kind of run this through now that we've told this story that's a little bit all over the place. So I'm down at the end of the table. I'm in pole position. I am Romple stopping Jason, and then Jitte comes out. And then guess who's not Romple stopping Jason? The guy that doesn't have Jitte. And then the next game, I'm going at him again. I'm taking pole position, controlling it. And then Jitte comes out and takes me again. So I'm the first grumbles at the end of the table. So to set some context, the Almost Legendaries cube is a clone. So Nathan is a new curator, and he's working to adapt and basically weed out some of the stuff from the previous. That's what happens with cloning.
Absolutely.
Is sometimes you may have gotten some of the residual context from another curator. So he's learning this on the fly as we go, correct? But I'm down there just losing my mind at one end of the table. And then he kind of like, I think it's fine. And then the next set rolls up. Here comes Stu, and he's like, oh my God, Jitte is crushing me. And he's like, maybe this is for real. Maybe Anthony's not making this up. I'm like, so there's a lot to unpack here in what we just said. There was feedback. Maybe mine wasn't the most polite because I'm losing my mind. Stu did a much better job of eloquently processing his feedback.
Yeah, yelling Jitte is BS over and over again when you're about to get wrecked is probably not. But I said, like, look, this card, as is going to be this case for other cards that we're going to talk about in this episode, this is a vintage power level card. This is not, under any circumstances, a card that you can just put in a list because it either fits thematically, which obviously this does. It's a legendary artifact. You cannot just willy-nilly throw these cards into a cube and then just take it to CubeCon like Anthony's about to. There has to be, some balance in the power level. But yeah, I mean, it's and spoiler alert, it's not in the cube anymore. But that was just.
It was devastating
how strong
it was. It didn't matter what creature it was on. May, do you have any thoughts about it before we move past Jitte?
Yes. I'm actually going to give a little bit of pushback. Not because I don't think that you're correct about Jitte in that environment. You're 100% right. Is that, hey, maybe we shouldn't add just, something that comes down, kind of wins the game versus the majority of the matchups, But I do have a counterpoint.
Sure.
That just because a card is powerful or played in Vintage does not mean that it doesn't scale with power level ever. For example, in the Fae Cube, I have a card called Once Upon a Time. And this card's kind of notorious. It's 1 and a green instant. If this is the first spell that you would play this game, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. Look at the top 5 cards of your library, reveal a creature or a land card from among them, put it into your hand, and then put the rest at the bottom of your library in any order. So I have this in the Fae Cube exactly for the same reason that Jitte is in that Legendary Cube of, this is flavorful. This is like the perfect embodiment of what I'm trying to do. But the difference between Jitte and why I included Once Upon a Time is that Jitte is a card that can come down and take over a game by itself. Once Upon a Time is a consistency piece. I will also add that one of the biggest changes between limited and constructed is the fact that you don't get to run 4 copies of a card. So only having one means that you just kind of have a pretty good card if it's not the first spell, and then a really good card if it is. And even if it does, it just helps you get to the pieces that do help you win.
Yep.
And Jite comes down, and versus the majority of like creature decks or whatever, then you just kind of don't exist. Things that give options versus things that take away agency is something that you should consider when it comes to these power outliers.
Do you know what really helps when you've got a huge power outlier like Jite in your cube? Is a way to tutor it into your hand, and that also was in our good friend Jason's deck.
He was tutoring it
You're absolutely right. He did not have 4 copies of Jite, but he at least has functionally 2 copies because he's got a tutor.
Yeah,
and that was only the cards that I saw. I didn't see him break down his deck. He might have had another way to go into his library and just pull Jite either into his hand or the top of his library. So now we're looking at least 2, maybe even 3 ways to just go and get a huge power outlier. And I agree 100%, just because something is in the vintage cube as an example doesn't mean it's inappropriate for other cubes. But this, as the way that it functions and just the way that it can take over and end games and the ability to be able to go get it, it's pretty devastating.
And the comedy behind all this is Jason was well aware that he was doing this. Like, Dr. Jason Brinkley was giggling. He's like, "Oh, I'm going to go get Jite." I'm like, "Oh my God."
I would have done.
I look like John McClane in Die Hard 2 with the flames going down the runway going, "Nathan, oh my God, why is this in this cube?"
I would have picked it. Look, don't get me wrong. I like to play fun decks. I don't typically like aggro-y kind of decks. I don't normally veer towards them. Not as much anymore. But if I see something like Jite in a cube like that, in any kind of thematic cube, I'm going to either take it or I'm going to say, I don't know if you should be playing this card. It's kind of too powerful.
Yeah, we kind of gave him the feedback, but it was interesting. So I didn't do my responsible feedback. Stu definitely took care of that in an appropriate manner. I was losing my mind. And only because Jason was rubbing it in my eye the whole time, like, I'm getting Jite. I was like, oh my God.
It obviously, when it comes to cube design, there are no hard rules, and taking a pile of cards is a good first step. But considering what's a fun play experience for everyone else is something that you should consider when it comes to things like Jite. And like I said before, Jite kind of takes away agency from your opponents because it doesn't matter what cool things that they built, because the one card that you have just kind of negates their whole deck.
Yeah.
And that is something that you can keep in mind with your power outliers.
So there's another topic here. So we kind of continue the back porch magic story, right? So we move over to Sandwich's Peasant Cube, also featured at CubeCon. And this one, Stu and I are going to slightly disagree on, but Stu had some feedback about a very particular card. Stu, would you mind talking this card out and explaining to the audience why you were flagging this card as being, what I felt you were demonstrating as a high power outlier?
Yeah. So this is Mother of Runes. 1 white, Mother of Runes, creature human cleric, 1/1. Very simply, tap it, target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. Again, another card that's vintage power level is in the vintage cube, will probably be so for the entire of the history of Magic. Very, very powerful card. One of the most powerful 1-drops that's ever been printed. And I question this, and not necessarily just because I felt that the card was powerful. I've only drafted the Peasant Cube a handful of times or less. But the 2 points I made was, if you've got a cube that is relatively creature-centric, right? And a lot of those cubes tend to be, you don't have the big flashy spells or, the storm combos or anything like that. A lot of those cubes, and the Peasant Cube, I feel like is similar like that, right? You've got a lot of the creatures turning sideways is how games are going to win.
Peasant cubes can have storm.
They can.
There are
absolutely
storm cards in Peasant.
Yeah. So, but his Peasant Cube seemed to be, at least the matches that I played, seemed to be quite creature-centric. And even if you do have those combo wins, which absolutely you can, this was another one where I played a game against the player who drafted this, and I asked, this just seems very, very strong to me. This seems to me like just an individual card that is so powerful and is able to get around other very important effects within the cube, and now they're gone. Now they're useless against the deck. And this was how it was. It was another aggro deck that I was playing, and I'm sort of going to cannibalize a statement that I'm going to make in a future in this episode, maybe. But it seemed very problematic. And I just looked at it as like, really, this is a peasant level card? It seems like it's a huge power outlier. And I looked at you, Anthony, and I said, look, is this something that you might agree with? Because it just seems like it's a very powerful card for this environment. And you said...
I'm wishy-washy on it. And the reason why I'm wishy-washy on it is because it's been at an uncommon level for a very long time, and it has been tested across numerous peasant lists. So it's not like it's something that Chris got the other day for his birthday and just plugged in and wanted to try out. Like it's slightly normalized in peasant environments. Now, on the counterpoint that you're making, I would say that it's an extreme power outlier, but I think that oftentimes happens. Like we just got that Commander remastered set where they downgraded a bunch of cards that maybe shouldn't have been downgraded, but now they're going to enter into the uncommon territory of peasants and so on and so forth. One of them was like Gonti. Gonti just now got scaled down.
That's down to uncommon, is that
correct? It's
correct?
uncommon.
Yeah.
So you're going to start seeing these cards, and peasant curators are really excited to have higher levels of play, but still maintain that silver color, right? They want to see that set symbol colored with silver. There's a little bit of allure there to that. They get pretty excited about it. And it's hard probably for them to balance that equation. Mother Runes has just become normalized in my mind. I am on both sides of the fence here. I think it could wreck a couple of games. I think it can also make some games end that need to end because the traffic stalls that can happen in some of these environments, if you're doing creature-based versus creature-based, this allows something to get through.
And it was more questioning on my part. I'm not knowledgeable enough about the cube by any stretch to say, hey, this needs to be removed. And that was not how I approached the conversation. It was really more so like, hey, is this something that's fairly accepted across peasant cubes? And Chris said, yeah, absolutely. Similarly to what you just said, Anthony, that this is basically a card that's been accepted is appropriate for a peasant power level. I said, okay, that's cool. Like, I think that's fine. Again, he's definitely the expert in the environment. And if that's the case, then cool. But it definitely, in the games that I played against it, it ended the game.
I think if you were doing the pulse, this is a little bump in this story because of the environment and context of which it's in. Whereas that Jitte was like a high level spike that we could definitely notice if we're tracking it right. It was turning games inside out. This may just make some haymaker games. This might not do anything. This might protect your value engine, but we'll just have to see. But so far, I've played this card. I've never walked away saying that I feel bad about this being in his environment.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Like I say, I don't want to say I was playing an aggro deck. That's actually not really fair to what I was doing. I was not just putting creatures down and turning them sideways. I had some other strategies that I was trying to implement. And maybe it was because I was, the kind of archetype and the kind of deck that I drafted, this was just quite strong against it. But those two combinations of the factors, what it was doing in the game that I played, plus just the notorious, power level that this card has, was where the conversation came from. But I'd be interested to do some further, play with it more and see how it goes.
Mate, do you have any thoughts on Mother Runes before we kind of walk away from this one?
I do. In the context of Mother of Runes in Peasant, it ultimately comes down to what your current power band is, because at its floor, so long as your opponent doesn't have the answer immediately, they effectively have to either punish you for overextending with Mother of Runes, which at that point you're probably just getting unblockable damage anyways, or they have to double spell the Mother of Runes in order to get rid of it. Yeah. And in both of those situations, it can lead to the board stalls, because while you say that it has the power to punch through and help close out games because it gives you protection to get through your opponent's board, obviously. But on the flip side of that, it also can add board stalls because now your opponent can't really interact with it because it's just like, all right, well, I now have a handful of removal, but I can't use it because you have Mother Runes. That sucks.
So that's the interesting juxtaposition of this card is it's offensive and defensive. It's reactive and proactive. So yeah.
Depending on the environment and what kind of power that you're trying to go for in your peasant, then this is a perfect example of a card that could fluctuate a lot within those rules, and depending on what your environment's doing, it could either be extremely punishing, or it can just be on par with all the rest of the best cards.
So, Mother Runes, I think if we all had to do thumbs up, thumbs down, we're going to say Peasant Cube amongst the three of us. I'm thumbs up. What do you think?
I'm
okay with it.
I'm
Jitte thumbs down on the first
Jitte
one.
thumbs down. Mother of Runes, thumb in the middle. I don't know. Like I say, I definitely did not want to approach it and wouldn't to Chris, who is extremely strong. Peasant curator, has been doing it for a gazillion years. But I don't know. I will say that. I'll leave that as my stance. I don't know.
Let's ask May as the unbiased officiate here. The two stories you just heard, the Jitte Nightmare, I'm not biasing that at all. And
Just a little bit.
Just Mother of Runes, right? What are your thoughts on those two as far as the power outlier based on what you've learned based on our conversations?
Based on our conversations on the interior environments that you've had, I don't know the environment that you played Mother of Runes. I'm just gonna say that outright. So it's hard for me to say whether or not it does belong in that cube, but Jitte, it definitely did not belong in the
Almost legendary
cube that you were partaking in,
Yeah.
and that was probably a mistake. But for Mother of Runes, it's kind of the boring answer. Context matters.
Yep. So last year, CubeCon, UberBear's Artifact Cube was featured. I've talked about that ad nauseum at this point. And there were definitely some cards that were flagged as, and we've talked about this in our lessons learned episodes. And you would think that I would have learned by now, right? But
No. I know you well enough, Anthony. You're not.
so some new cards came out recently in the Lord of the Rings set, and they're pretty shiny. And I grabbed one in particular, and we've talked about it. This will be officially the third time we've spoken about this card in particular. And our recent Extra Life convention we went to, it was just through happenstance. I was talking to another drafter, and they said, hey, I think this card would be really fun in here. It'd be great to support your self-mill package, which does oftentimes struggle being the most fun, in my opinion, but also sometimes the weakest package. And this brand new card came out, and I have this habit of a curator is doing this binary thought process of, oh, this is what this card is going to do. This is the function and form of said card. When people see this, they're going to know this is exactly what it is for. Self-mill. Stu, would you mind reading this card one more time, please?
Sure. So this is Palantir of Orthanc. This is a 3 colorless mana legendary artifact. At the beginning of your end step, put an influence counter on Palantir of Orthanc and scry 2. Then target opponent may have you draw a card. If that player doesn't, you mill X cards, where X is the number of influence counters on Palantir of Orthanc, and that player loses life equal to the total mana value of those cards. Again, as we mentioned previously, very word soupy, lot going on, but it's a monster.
Yeah, so allow me. So, like I said, self-mill, this is going to be its friend. I'm completely blindsiding the fact that it's colorless, right? Only self-mill is going to want this, right? Period.
Yes.
Well, because I've been doing this MTG Cube drafting site, I've been getting a lot of drafts, I've been getting new people come in and test out my cubes, and I am seeing the nightmare unfold. Let's start with this. I'm seeing every time I post it up, hey, pick a pack one, pick one, and this shows up, that one. That one every time.
Every time.
So I'm like, all right, cool, but don't you want the I don't know, this vampire that has a nope, that one.
It's interesting as well because Lord of the Rings has literally dumped 2 of the most insanely strong colorless cards that we've seen in quite a while, right? Palantir of Orthanc is an incredibly powerful card, very high pickable regardless of the environment, and the One Ring, and maybe the One Ring, you maybe second think that a little bit because it's so notorious. That is a very, very powerful card.
This was very subtle, and
Exactly.
I don't follow a lot of like legacy formats and modern. And May, do you follow any of these formats at all?
Sometimes.
This one had not been, hadn't seen the flag raised for this one as of yet. And now I'm hearing it's just popping up all over the place because people are realizing the infamy of this card. But it was overshadowed by the One Ring. So I'm okay with testing. The point is this going to be my extreme power outlier? I do believe, or one of many. And I recently watched, again, one-sided train of thought. It's going to be for self-mill. Gonna help it. And then I watched a person draft an Aristocrats deck populated with all these vampires to aristocrats and threw this in here too.
Do you know what kind of deck I'm putting this card in? Every single deck I draft ever.
Yep.
Because it's 3 colorless, it goes in anything, it's either giving me cards or it's dumping a bunch of damage to my opponent. Like, it's not ever going to be a card that I look at and think, I don't want to draw it early, I don't want to draw it late, I'm never going to feel like that. If I've got it in my opener, great. If I top deck it, just as great. And it can close games out by either card advantage or damage. And I've seen instances where this card has come down First turn, opponent, I'll take the damage. Bang. 6 or 7 damage. Every turn after that, well, now I have to give you cards. And now you're swallowing them in attrition. So it's just, and again, this colorless and the ability to fit into every deck.
It's a Swiss Army knife.
It's so good.
And
it's so good.
I'm happy to have it in here. May, you have a thought on it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting when it comes to a case like this of it's really easy to, as the top-down curator, of being like, I want to introduce this to help improve the power level of a certain archetype, etc., but then accidentally improve the power level of a bunch of other things that you weren't intending to improve. And that tends to happen a lot for people, but sometimes you also have to step back and ask, even though that this isn't doing the thing that I'm wanting, is this doing a thing that players enjoy?
And I think they will.
That people
I think they
enjoy
will.
playing against and playing with.
Yeah. So if I dismantle this card now that I've seen multiple drafts come up, and I want to see this at CubeCon, but what I'm curious and a little bit, nervous about the power level of this card is I've seen people, like I said, do the damage portion with the aristocrats. I've also seen a draft with reanimators, so I can see value to that. And then I can see someone that tried to pull off a self-mill. So I think people are going to latch onto it for multiple reasons, and it's going to be a Swiss Army knife type of application, and I'm okay with that. But this is going to be the one that might be that little power spike, that little sprinkle. We'll find out soon enough, won't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I actually have a similar card that I wanted to mention that is in the same kind of top-down context in a way, but in the Fae Cube I have Mirror Entity, and it is 2 and a white for a creature shapeshifter changeling 1/1. You can pay X, creatures you control become XX, and gain all creature types until end of turn. I put this in to be a glue piece to kind of help close the game later, but also as a way that you can get some of those typal payoffs early. But what ended up happening is that almost every white deck wants the Mirror Entity, and because almost every deck that's playing white wants Mirror Entity, I've seen decks splash white just to play the Mirror Entity. But I have to look at this card, sit back in the similar case, if this does a thing that I think is good for the environment. Even though that it is a power outlier, it does scale with the game as the game goes on, but it can just close the game as well, and games need to end. And sometimes when you have either something that gives so absurd value, like the artifact that you mentioned earlier, I'm not saying its name, God help me, or in the case of Mirror Entity,
Paladin of Ornithopter.
Or in the case of Mirror Entity, where it is very clearly a threat, and if your opponent cannot answer it almost immediately, then it can usually close the game either on the spot or in the following turn.
You only need a few pieces of
sometimes
mana.
Sometimes that's just a good thing.
Yeah, you don't need a whole lot to turn that into a game-ending piece, right? For creatures and a bit of mana, and you're good to go. You can make those creatures very, very powerful. Also, it's a nice, will I, won't I kind of piece where you can attack with it and am I going to activate it?
As a matter of fact, Jonathan, our good friend ChiliMTG, last CubeCon probably doesn't recall this conversation, but the reason why you won't find Mirror Entity in Uberbear's Horror Cube floating around to this CubeCon is because he flagged it as kind of a flavor. I think it was a flavor fail on his part. He was asking, why is this card in here? But also because the typal ability of it to take over games. He did say it felt odd and strange, amongst the vampires and werewolves and all that. So that was my only changeling in that environment. So good luck. Godspeed to you, May. Pretty sure that's a pack one, pick one, in my opinion.
Yes.
I think it's a high power
absolutely.
spike. Yeah.
Time that you have a power outlier that can be a pack one, pick one because it can act as a glue piece as I intended, but in a way that is stronger or more open than intended, if that makes sense.
Yep.
It doesn't make it a bad thing, it just makes it a thing to keep in mind.
So, our next card. So, I was hanging out with my buddy Nathan, the curator of the Almost Legends Cube, just recently. And he wanted to do some trades. I'm like, sure, man, we're killing some time. People aren't over here yet. Let's get some trades on. So, let's bust out our binders. And he says, I've got this new card, Agatha's Soul Cauldron. And I'm not going to read all of it yet. I'm just going to tell you how I sees it when I look at it. We're going to do it in a second. I see creatures you control with 1/1 counters on them have all activated abilities of creature cards exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. I'm like, oh my god, I run a modular. It's going to be amazing. That sounds fun. Let's go ahead and add that to Uberbear's Artifact Cube. Let's get that in there right now. Let's get the sleeves out. What day is it? It's 2 days before the CubeCon lock. Oh yeah, let's put this in here real quick. So I sleeved it up, added it, done. And then like September the 14th rolled around and Nathan goes, dude, you see how this card is spiking? I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, Agatha Soul Cauldron. It's like it's showing up in all kinds of like, I guess modern starting to adopt it. People are starting to break it. There's 9 combos have been unlocked.
It's a very popular card in the Hardened Scales.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with that.
Yep. Would you mind reading this card to the audience, please? It's another word soup, literally as she makes soup.
Sure. Yeah. Agatha Soul Cauldron, 2 colorless for another legendary artifact. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to activate abilities of creatures you control. Creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them have all activated abilities of all creature cards exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. And then you may tap it, exile target card from a graveyard. When a creature card is exiled this way, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Let's just, first of all, talk about that last ability and ignore the rest. Okay? So first of all, exile target card. So now you've got a nice little hate piece for only 2 mana. I like that. When a creature card is exiled this way, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Hey, little bit of kind of a scavenging ooze kind of deal, but you don't have to put the +1/+1 counter on scavenging ooze. You know, you don't gain life though, which is kind of unfortunate.
Aww.
But yeah, then you've literally got every activated ability of every creature that you've got in any graveyard ever.
So let me run you through this process. So I added this card, seemed safe. So I got it, I sleeved it up, I've committed. Nathan has pitched it to me. I'm like, hell yeah, we're putting this in the cube. This seems interesting. This will help out modular. That's what I said. And I'm like, oh, maybe it'll get rid of some graveyard threats. And I just kind of nodded my head. And then about like 2 days later, he's texting me. He's like, did you check for any combos? Like literally, he convinced me to put this. He goes, okay, fine. I'll check. So I did the commander spell table. And I'm like, yeah, no combos found. I'm like, seems okay, not broken yet. I'm like, because I was a little concerned because I was starting to see some videos pop up on Twitter and all that, like how to break Agatha's Soul Cauldron. And I'm like, whatever, fine. The lists are now locked for CubeCon. And then I posted in the Discord, I kind of made a joke like, hey, last second, CubeCon Discord, I just decided to add Agatha's Soul Cauldron. And they're like, oh my God, what? And then people started responding, and it wasn't combos. It was like broken synergies. And here's some that came up. I said, well, I was thinking it would be okay, like for some cool welder effects. Like you can do some welders, goblin welders or whatnot. And they're like, no, that's pretty good, but gets better. I'm like, wait, there's more? And then they started talking about, Stu, would you mind discussing these 2 cards?
So the first one, I mean, Emery, Lurker of the Loch, 2 colorless and 1 blue, legendary creature, merfolk wizard. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control. Okay, that's all very well and good. When it enters the battlefield, mill 4 cards. Yeah, okay, that's fine. But then you can tap, choose target artifact card in your graveyard. You may cast that card this turn. So now,
here we are.
So let's go back. Let's rewind this just for a second. Creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them have all activated abilities of all creature cards exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron.
I was pretty thorough too. I used my finger on my screen, which is was 20 inches, and I counted 1, 2. I didn't filter. I wanted to. I feel so. It's too late. It's in now. Welcome to CubeCon, Agatha's Soul Cauldron. But I started watching all these videos, and I don't have any of the combo pieces. The combos are pretty convoluted, at least the ones I saw. A lot of them did include stuff like an aristocrat of some form, or a walking ballista, or grist, and there was all these broken things you could do. It was nonsense. I don't have any of that, but there are some nutty synergies. Untested is the point of this conversation.
Yes.
I'm going to assume from the infamy that has erupted from the internet, kind of like with the Palantir of
Orthanc, yeah.
that these cards are going to be noticeable, colorless power outliers to be determined on what the aspect of that outlier is, right? Is it that sprinkle of salt? Is that little bit? Or is this just like dumping all the Mortons on top?
I think
Jitte.
I think the thing about cards like Palantir of Orthanc and cards like Agatha's Soul Cauldron is that because they are very, very powerful pieces outside of the archetype that you're a curator, you're looking at cards to enrich the cube and enrich certain archetypes and strategies within your cube. But a lot of these cards, especially the ones that we've just mentioned, they have these super powerful effects outside of just they are supportive of an archetype. Right? Agatha's Soul Cauldron is great. I think it is a little more narrow, and I'm saying that and please don't think that I'm saying the card is narrow, because it's not. It's super powerful. I think Palantir is a much more generically powerful card, because you can literally put it in any deck and the effects are just bananas regardless of what you're doing. Agatha's Soul Cauldron is a little more powerful in the archetype that you're putting it in, right? So if you've got those +1/+1 counters, you've got you've got the one primary example of a card that synergizes incredibly well with it from an exile perspective, which is Emery, and then from an enabler perspective, which is Walking Ballista. There's other cards that there's a gazillion cards out there that, either put +1/+1 counters on themselves or other creatures or whatever. So that needs a little bit more work, I think, to really take advantage of the power level. But Palantir is just bananas regardless. And again, I'll go back to talk about the One Ring, right? Again, it's another colorless card that came from that set. It's super, super busted. Definitely, I would say the One Ring is probably the most narrow. And maybe it's the most narrow because it's the most powerful. It just draws cards and gives you that protection when it comes down. But that's enough. Like, you couldn't have any more effects on that card. It's too good by itself. But it's interesting that you've just kind of thrown these in, I will say.
Yeah. May I have a question for you, actually? The curveball. Yes. And it's just a correlation that I'm making as we move along. Do you feel, because we're getting a lot of releases, that these colorless Swiss Army knives are kind of problematic and hard to evaluate? And what are your thoughts on them being power outliers just because someone's looking for a certain function of one of these cards, but maybe not looking at every tier of what this card can do, like in the examples we've provided? Jitte's it's a Swiss Army knife. Yep. They're all Swiss Army knives out of the three, right? So what do you think about that, May?
So I think that a lot of people tend to forget that when it comes to artifacts, and especially artifacts that come out of artifact-focused sets, because they tend to be a little bit more pushed than other environments, but a lot of people tend to forget that artifacts tend to be a lot more powerful than they read because of their innate flexibility of inclusion. So, following your curveball all the way down to the home plate here, back in Kaladesh, there was a card called Smuggler's Copter, right? And what ended up happening is that Smuggler's Copter was just the correct card every time, because why would you ever take another 2-drop over Smuggler's Copter? This is just the best 2-drop. Every deck wants it, every deck can play it, and when you have colorless cards, a lot of people tend to forget that in their assessments, and then they think just kind of what the archetype does and then go down the list from what the archetype is, rather than assessing it of, this can literally go in any deck, but what decks are going to want it is almost secondary to what it's able to do by itself. Agatha's Soul Cauldron has this kind of built-in engine for it. It fuels itself. It's its own hate piece. It puts things out of play it's Merwelder on crack.
Right.
All right? And when people sit down with things like Merwelder, then you expect what Merwelder does. You know that they're going to be doing something disgusting with that Merwelder. But as soon as people are doing that with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, people tend to forget, oh, right, this can go with pretty much everything. And when something goes with everything, it's hard to predict every interaction. And you, as a curator, can overlook that because it's a lot of different combinations. And you are, in a sense, competing versus your players for figuring out what decks go together. In a sense, you are trying to compete against your pod as a think tank of what decks are they going to come up with versus what deck are you trying to, not rail them into, but what decks you're trying to seed into your environment. And Agatha's Soul Cauldron is a case where it could be misguided of, oh, this helps the modular stuff, haha. And like you said, oh, this is a lot more powerful than I was giving it credit.
And I'm willing to accept that, right? I mean, there's a certain amount of this that's okay. As long as it's not, and I don't want to keep harping on the Jitte scenario. It was two people, like, literally screaming, like...
Where did the Jitte touch you? Are you okay?
It did. Yeah. We are not okay. We are not okay.
We brought the doll out, and it touched me everywhere, and I hated every second of it.
Yeah.
And interesting, right? So I agree with what you've said. And here's the thing. You are but one man, Anthony. And you only have so much time, especially when you're seeing all these shiny, beautiful new cards from a new set. You've got a time constraint on your hands. You're trying to get these cubes ready for CubeCon, which was obviously your motivation when you were looking at these just recently. You are one person who's looking at this card and these other, or all these cards in a short period of time, and you're looking at it through the lens of the archetypes within your cube versus every other person who is thinking about your cube, and that's all the players that are signing up for the drafts. Every player, even when you just sit down with 7 other people on a Thursday night or a Saturday night at BDSM when we're trying to play one of these cubes, and everyone is just looking at, how can I break this? What other things can I do with this, right? You are one person, one brain, but everyone else has got so much more access because there's just the quantity of thought, minutes that they're looking at these cards and thinking, how can I break it? How can I do something egregious with it, right? Nathan's looking at Umezawa's Jite and thinking, cool, legendary artifact. That looks like fun. It fits perfect. And then it gets put into a deck by someone. I actually think Jite is a bad example because I think it's such an egregious card because it's so strong and such a closer that,
I think Selesnya was the perfect storm.
It's been out long enough.
I agree.
That people have already gotten that.
You've got to figure it out by now. Yeah,
over.
exactly. But something like Agatha's Soul Cauldron, I think, honestly, because of the amount of times that's going to get drafted, the cube that's in, that is going to be potentially the one card that receives the most amount of why on earth is this card in this cube? It's completely broken. It doesn't fit.
They'll be like, bring back Collector Oath, please.
I don't think they'll say that. But they'll say, can you please put in Hero's Blade? Like we said, maybe it should be put in instead of Jite. But yeah, there's so many of them. And I'll say this, again, going back again to what May said, is so perfect about artifacts, right? They don't have to fit in a particular deck because they can fit in any deck. They cost colorless mana for the most part. Yeah, all right, you've got your Lion Sashes and whatever's out there that have got colorless mana, have got colored mana, but there's so many of these, and these are all examples of artifacts that are only colorless mana. They've got abilities that are strong regardless of the deck that they're being played in, and I think you're a brave man. That's all. I'm gonna end that portion on that. You're a brave man throwing these cards in there, and I think it is a trend. I will say this: it is a bit of a trend now that we've seen with the Lord of the Rings cards and other sets. You've got these very, very powerful artifacts. They do go basically in any deck if you want. Even Walking Ballista. Look at Walking Ballista. I love it. It's absolutely one of my most favorite cards that's ever been printed. Right? Very, very elegant. It's a way to finish a game. It can go bananas if you've got ways to increase the +1/+1 counters, and you can redo. Yeah, I mean, it's such a fun card.
Throwing a Gath, proliferation.
Exactly.
I'm doing all the breakage. So Uberbear's Artifact Cube is a known quantity at this point. People are expecting these things.
It was. And now it isn't anymore. Or maybe it is, and it's maybe like pick Palantir of Orthong or die.
That's the horror cube. I got to have some shockers. Right. May, do you have anything else to add before we come to closing? Anything you've done that was untested, was the right sprinkle of power outliers to kind of you want to. I don't like having flat environments. I like having these exciting moments, but I don't want to add cards that completely take over games consistently. So that's that weird balancing act that you and I are always doing as curators to ensure that the fun is kind of a revolving door, right? Everybody gets a little bit of the fun. Right. And everybody's having fun, but, everybody needs to win a little bit, right? I don't want one card. I hate to beat up Jite. And it was only 2 people, but we're both screaming pretty loud. And I feel like Jite really doesn't fit with these other 2 broken cards. I don't run Jite in the Uberbear's Artifact Cube.
No, you shouldn't.
No.
And actually, going on to, and I want to ask this as we're asking May, right? Tell me how you feel about this. We've talked about all these cards during this episode. The highest CMC of all these cards was 3, which is Palantir. Jite is 2, right? Look at the other cards. Agatha's Soul Cauldron, also 2 mana. Very easy to play. They're artifacts, right? You can play them in anything. Is this a trend that you want in your cubes, where you want these artifacts to be not just strong in an archetype, but literally super high power picks that you are basically advertising as pick one, pack oneable because they're so strong by themselves? There's think about them almost like, look at a fetch land when you're playing a vintage cube, as an example, right? I will take those very highly. They don't lock me into a color. They allow me to fix my mana. I don't have to worry about the mana necessarily when I'm picking a colorless card, but I'm picking them because they're very, very powerful and they go into everything.
Yeah, so they're universal. Yes. And what I think is great about these cards, I could actually write a nice polite letter and say, oh, please, sir, could I remove these from my cube? I don't want to. I actually want the spice in here. I'm okay with accepting what may come. Something wicked this way may come. It's Agatha Soul Cauldron. Let's see what happens. I mean, let's go, right? People can solve it. Sure. That's what Mengelhorn's for. Draft that, Rex Sage, you'll be all right.
So, continuing your thought, if that is okay.
Yeah.
I had a similar experience when I was a few updates ago. 4, 5, 6-ish updates ago, I think.
Of the Fae Cube?
And
was this of the Fae Cube you're talking about? So this was about 5 or 6 updates. That's maybe a couple of days ago?
It's like 3 minutes.
2 or 3 days ago? Just checking.
Listen, I am very good about it. I have a system where I put things on the maybe board. I wait a few months. We have an episode about it. You can go watch that episode. Listen to that episode. Anyways, my point is that there was a time where wolves were exceptionally pushed in the Fae Cube, right? But I was slowly trying to push the envelope before trying to get to the point where it's just like, okay, how much is too much before it just gets too strong? And I had this one wolf. It was like a 6-drop. What was it called? It was like Hollow Henge Overlord or something. The card itself is not important. I'm not wanting to go into context about it. But the point is that it took what I was trying to improve too far. And I'm very much in the boat as a curator that I want to introduce something that is spicy, that encourages people to draft into that lane, that direction, whatever. And when you have a lot of generically open cards, just as a complete contrast, that these end up becoming spicy in almost every deck that they end up in. But because it's so spicy, people might find more aha moments like we mentioned earlier because of it. So even though Stu and I may be shaking our head at Anthony right now of, no, honey, no. But at the end of the day, it is worth testing because sometimes people can find really weird things to do with it, or sometimes people can just take over the game because it's busted. Sometimes it's worth treading that.
Yeah,
it's worth treading that.
Yeah, it's okay. I'll accept it. I'll accept my lumps. So I think the gist of this episode, in so many words, is it's okay to have a certain amount of power outliers. If you hear me scream, probably ignore me. But if you hear Stu scream...
Hang on. Let's first of all get one thing very clear here, Anthony.
Yeah.
The first final thought that you've got on our show notes, which are publicly posted in our Discord, are testing is important.
I put that after I realized I had not tested these 2 cards.
I was going to say, how important is testing for you, Anthony?
I want to remind them that they should test, whereas I don't.
That's fair. I think that should, instead of reading testing is important, it should read testing is important unless you're Anthony and you get shiny syndrome and just want to throw Agatha Soul Cauldron in your cube.
I want to impress people. So the right amount of power outliers is okay, right?
Right.
No curator's ever going to get it right. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Are the power outliers okay at 2 mana and 3 mana and colorless when they are not just value pieces? And I think going back again to May, what you said, you're talking about a wolf where wolves are pushed. It's a 6 mana card. It's not a card that's just going to slot into any deck. It's a card that is going to be advantageous for a typal deck build. Whereas what we're talking about is not a 6 mana card or a 5 or a 4. It's 1, 3 and a couple of 2s. So now we're not talking about these power outliers. And I think power outliers are okay. It's interesting that we've talked about these power outliers and none of them are top-end cards. Not one of them. Not one of them is hey, here's a 7-drop. Here's a Tali that is absolutely could be considered a power outlier because when you drop it, it's got the ability to end the game right there. Or Craterhoof Behemoth, which could be potentially a huge power outlier. We're talking about power outliers at the 2 and 3. You barely need to even splash a color in multiple of these cases, you don't need to splash a color to make them impactful. I think these are outside of just power outliers from a cube perspective. They're power outliers potentially from a entire of Magic perspective, and going back again to the One Ring, that could potentially be looked at as a power outlier throughout the history, as I think we should look at something like Umezawa's Jite.
Or Soul Ring for that matter.
Or Soul Ring, or Mana Crypt, or a gazillion other brand
tech
cards.
And it's enablers.
Yeah.
And I want people to see the tech. When I mean tech, they have the ability as the drafter to design their deck around what of those modes best fits them. I think it's interesting, like Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Yes, we could break it because we're, when you're watching Jeopardy, for example, and
I never watched Jeopardy.
Well, I do. And you're screaming the answer at the television for the love of God, why did you not know that was XYZ? But when they're sitting behind that podium and they've got that little red button in there and they've got seconds against two other people that are equally as brilliant, if not more, they're under that high volume of pressure. They're not thinking that clearly because they're in the game. They're in the moment, right? And as the person looking outside in, it's easy to go, oh my gosh, you should make this into a walking ballista. You should break this with Emery or some kind of goblin welder, which will happen, right?
Yep.
But I'm excited about people looking for avenues and coming to me and saying that was a really enhanced line of play, that it wasn't flat. They saw those power spikes, those bumps. And yeah, I mean, it's okay. Even referencing back to the Jite, it did what it was supposed to do. It made the Selesnya deck, which typically wouldn't have been as powerful, frankly, allow that person to turn whatever Jason turning sideways to attack. And that was his strategy. He tutored it up. Kudos on him for drafting a really powerful deck, right? Mm-hmm. And, anti-kudos on me for not getting anything to remove and deal with it because I'm in Dimir. But that's not the fault of Jason. He was doing the thing that the card was designed to do.
He did what every other player at that table would have done. Given the opportunity, which was take the most powerful card. And anytime you get the opportunity to take a card in a draft, especially if you are just trying to build a deck to win, you are going to take those power outliers.
Which is
You're
okay.
going to take
it's
those
okay,
super strong cards.
Right?
Of course it is, yeah.
It's okay. Yeah, and as the curator, the feedback is going to be okay. And we can't do it in a vacuum. You can't be me down screaming it in the table on Sunday afternoon at Stu's house, shouting to the heavens that Jite needs to go. And that's just how it is. May, do you have any final thoughts?
Yes. So, when it comes to power outliers, I think that we should... And you're going to have to forgive me for the extra work that I'm about to put you through for the show notes here.
It's okay. Nobody reads them anyways.
I think that it is worth mentioning and talking about the opposite end of the spectrum. Stu touched on it a little, but a lot of the things that we've been talking about is in those 2-3 power outliers plots. This is things like Mirror Entity, Once Upon a Time, Soul Ring, Jite, etc. All the things that we've listed up to this point are below 3 mana. And when it comes to those power outliers, you have to ask, what kind of decks is this enabling? What kind of things are we trying to do with this? But there is a place for power outliers higher up on the curve to help close the game. And sometimes it is important for you as a curator to look at your power outliers and ask, is this a power outlier that I need because it closes the game at a certain turn? Or is this a power outlier that I need because it fills a certain role for a certain deck in that weird wolf example, right? I have a specific card in mind, and it is one that you've mentioned before, Anthony, for the Fae Cube. It's Una, Queen of the Fae, 3 Dimir, legendary creature, fairy, wizard, flying, pay X and Dimir. Choose a color. Target opponent removes the top X cards from their library from the game. For each of the chosen color, remove this way. Put it in 1/1 blue and black fairy rogue creature token with flying into play. So, the reason why I'm targeting this card in particular is that it is a 6-drop. So, if somebody is hard casting this, and they are able to immediately follow it up by exiling the top X cards of their opponent's deck and then getting an army of fairies, how much different is that from just playing a Shivan Dragon? At that stage of the game, when somebody's hard casting it, they are trying to close the game, and games need to end. And when you have power outliers like Una in my environment, it can be very intentional because it can lead to ways to create a win condition for certain decks. Blue-black control, etc. needs this top-end card to say, I have a mana dump to close the game. And it also can be a reanimator piece. It can be an additional mill piece. It can be its own just hard casting control. And when people see Una in the pack, they're going to be more incentivized to pick it because they have now a way to win the game for that cost. And when you're looking at a lot of these early game power outliers, you have to ask yourself, does this help close the game within however many turns? And is that something that I want for my environment? Or is this encouraging a deck or a exploration of decks that I'm wanting to encourage?
I agree.
Yeah.
Going back to that meme of the gentleman sprinkling the little bit of salt. The little toss.
Salt Bay.
And I think that's a good closer, actually, that the power outliers can, lay at any point on the mana curve, right? And that's okay. Right. And I probably have chosen the lower end of the spectrum because I want the fast and the furious gameplay. And then the Fae Cube wants more of the studious uptick. And then here's the grand finale. Here's my crescendo. This is what I'm doing.
I think the reason why you've chosen these, maybe either consciously or subconsciously, is because I think there's much more danger, as we've talked about, in power outliers that are low on the mana curve, and especially in cards that can just go in any deck. Because you've talked about, and I know we kind of closed this out, but oh well, we're still some more anyway. You've talked about the slot equity, right? Mm-hmm. These are very, very powerful cards. But do you want cards like this rather than slot equity for big, powerful cards like 6 and 7 mana, like your Unas of the world, that are going to be rewarding for an archetype in particular that gives an archetype a really, really fun win condition? Like, would you rather take out Una for your Dimir deck to put in Palantir of Earthank? Probably not, right? Same way that would you want to take it out even to put Sol Ring in there? Sol Ring is an incredibly powerful card. You're not going to take it out to put Una, you're not going to take out Una to put Sol Ring in there. It doesn't fit. Right. You're taking out what is a wonderful, and I think Una is just a godlike card for the Fae Cube and for Dimir in general. It's a wonderful win condition. Again, it's an elegant card that provides that win for those color types. Very, very cool card as well. Fun to play. And I think the care that you need to take into these power outliers being where they are, right? It's okay, again, if your power band is in that very, very broad, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If your power band is across everything, right? If you've got Mother of Runes and Sol Ring and Moxen and so on and so forth. But if you've got more of the setup at the low end and then the power outliers and the very, very high power finishers at the top end, to put in cards like that at the 2 and 3 mana that have the potential to take over the game so early when other players are trying to set up and just, play the deck that they've built, I think you got to be careful, very careful.
Yeah, sure.
It's dangerous.
And I agree with pretty much that is a total closing, actually. That's where we're at. You got to be careful, cautious, but I'm feeling a need for speed, so let's go. All right, Stu, would you mind taking us away with the socials, please?
So, as always, if you have enjoyed this show and any of the others before it, then we appreciate you, as with all of our listeners, and we would love for you to give us a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform. Keep the word getting out there, right? We want to hit all the listenings of the headphones and car stereos of all the Magic players and the Cube enjoyers out there.
AM, FM, all the above.
AM, FM, all of the above. Exactly.
Farmers only.
If you're looking for some bling for your Cube, go check out Alter Sleeves at www.altersleeves.com/UberCube, and you can get 5% off your purchase. And you can also check out our Inked Gaming affiliate link. We have playmats, dice bags, mouse pads, the whole 9 yards. Bling out your cube, your EDH deck, your modern deck, whatever the case may be. Lots and lots of cool products there. Anthony, I think you actually got some cool stuff from there recently,
I did, in fact, but I want to go ahead and just push this off to May. May, you just got your mat, didn't you?
Ooh.
I did.
It's pretty.
I just got it in the mail.
Nice.
And I am very happy with it.
I'm
I
waiting
am
for
also
mine.
really happy with just how Inked Gaming tends to have very high quality mats.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that compared to a lot of mats that kind of fray at the end over time, it has this kind of sew pattern at the ends, so that way it doesn't fray as easily, and that's just a nice touch.
Nice.
Yeah, the stitching is top notch. As a matter of fact, the UberCube mats that we got, I can give you the MSRP that what I rolled out the door. It was about $36, give or takes. But man, these mats are, they're quality. They'll last for years. I've beat the bejesus out of my other one from last year, and it's still kicking. Yours have been battle tested.
All my mats are in rough shape. I'm actually waiting for mine in the mail right now, and I can't wait.
We're all representing. So you'll see us at CubeCon.
They're in rough shape, yeah. And let's talk about the Twitters. Mm-hmm. You can reach us at Twitter at UberCubeMTGPod or X, but I'm always going to call it Twitter. And if you want to hit us up via email, you got questions about the podcast, about any of the subjects that we've covered, or even any of the cubes that we talk about, May's Fae Cube, Anthony's cubes, hit us up, UberCubeMTGPodcast at gmail.com. And also come check us out on Discord, hashtag UberCube. Lots of cool stuff going on. Again, I'm going to hit this up every time. Come show us in the Deck Boast channel. We want to see your 3-0s. We want to see your 0-3s. We want to see the cool and fun decks that you've drafted. A lot of cool stuff going on in that channel.
And, as we've talked about previously, I'm one of the admin of the MTG Cube drafting on Facebook. And the reason why I keep pitching this one because it is new Cuber friendly. We've got an episode coming out soon that May and I are going to work on together. It's about, I guess, the balancing of removal within your cube environments. And this is all based on questions that we receive, like, are there any heuristics that I can use as a 360 curator? And what is the right amount that I can use in my cube environment to make it so that we can have fun? These are the type of questions I receive on this channel, and I love it.
I love those conversations.
I am about it.
I've got one that I'm writing right now myself as well, where we're going to be talking about, as with the removal, some more meta stuff, right? Some more cube design. I think heuristics, analytics, metadata, so much cool information is out there now with resources like Cube Cobra, where you can go out there and you can look at, individual cards and the way other people are building their cubes. It makes so much sense to, see what works for other people.
And I will add too, check out our library. If you notice in our shows, we reference a lot of our previous shows because we touch upon points that we spoke about previously. And there's a reason for that because it's all kind of building up to the crescendo, right? Every time we're leapfrogging off of something that we've talked about before to carry it a little further, a little bit more depth. And that's just something that I enjoy as an author, like the next level storytelling. May, do you have anything to add to that?
Nope.
Perfect, May. Thank you, May. Carry on, Steve.
And as always, we want to give a huge... You, Anthony. We want to give a huge shout out to our Patreons. Shout out to Sam and Preston. We thank you guys very much for your ongoing support. And if you're interested in supporting the show, we would appreciate that. Check us out, www.patreon.com/UberCube, and come check us out. Thank you very much.
And Preston, I'm writing your episode. It's going to be very complex. Right. We're working on it.
Do you want a custom UberCube episode? That's how you get it.
That's what we're doing. That's how you get one written for you. All right. So we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube and say... Happy cubing! Happy Power Outliers. We don't know where we're at.